Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we got a super surprising, out of nowhere video today. So, as you probably know, a while ago, a bunch of Ixalan cards were leaked unofficially. Someone stole a sheet from the printers, and there was this big thing about it. Well, good news is, Wizards today, out of nowhere, decided to take care of the problem. And they said, basically, you already know these cards or you've seen bits and pieces of them. So here they are, official spoilers. And we got 58, I believe, Ixalan cards today, mostly rares and mythics. So spoiler season started off early, which means it is time for us to jump into our daily spoiler videos. Since there are so many new cards, we obviously can't talk about all of them today. So what we're going to do is talk first about the mythics and the mechanics. That'll be today's video for daily spoilers. And then over the rest of the week, we'll talk about each of the rares and mythics and all the cards that have been spoiled color by color. So keep an eye out for that. If you want to see all the cards early, follow the link in the description over to the Goldfish site. We got all the spoilers, the official ones, posted on the site now. So check that out. But we'll be back tomorrow to keep breaking down all the new sweet spoilers from Ixalan. Regardless, we got a ton of cards to talk about, so we better jump right into it. So first up, we have a new planeswalker, Jace Cunning Castaway. 3 mana, 3 loyalty, abilities, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff is kind of secondary with Jace, and we will talk about it a little bit in a minute, but the big deal here is it's confirmed. The text on Jace, legendary planeswalker Jace, and this is huge, massive news. The most important thing about this card. So basically, there's no more Planeswalker uniqueness rule. It is gone. Instead, all Planeswalkers, and this includes all Planeswalkers from the past too, will be errated, are now legendary. For the most part, this will play the same. The Planeswalker uniqueness rule is similar to the legend rule. However, there's one massive difference, and that massive difference is you can have multiples of the same Planeswalker on the battlefield at the same time. So I'm not sure how I feel about this part of the change. I like the legendary Planeswalker idea, but it's a little weird to me that your board state can be a Jace Cunning Castaway, a Jace the Mind Sculptor, a Jace Bellerin, a Jace Living Guild Pact, all at the same time, no problems under the rules. This is especially scary when you consider stuff like Gideon Tribal. That deck was already pretty close to being good, and one of the biggest problems it had is we would get Gideon flooded because you could only have one Gideon at once, but now, no problem. Player Gideon of Trials on 3, player Gideon Ally of Zendikar on 4, player Gideon Jura on 5. You got them all on the battlefield at once. Who cares? So it's going to be very interesting to see how this impacts gameplay. It's going to be very, very interesting. But the big news, legendary Planeswalkers, no more Planeswalker uniqueness rule. Also, it does some really cool tricks with Planeswalkers that we didn't have before. Mirror Gallery. You can potentially have 4 copies of Jace Cunning Castaway on the battlefield at once. Thalia's Lancers can now tutor up Planeswalkers, making it much, much better. So all kinds of things to break down. So make sure to let me know what you think about legendary Planeswalkers. Overall, I think it's a good change, but I can definitely see some downsides. I'm a little nervous about having multiples of the same Planeswalker on the battlefield at once, but we'll have to see. As far as Jace Cunning Castaway, it's a really tricky card to evaluate. It's got a little bit of Jace Friend's Prodigy in him, since you can +1 to loot, essentially, although you need a creature out. Also, a little bit like Jace Bellerin being 3 mana. One thing I've learned after a long time of evaluating cards is never, ever underestimate a 3 mana Planeswalker, because they're often a lot more playable than they look. So I think the weird thing about Jace in Standard is I'm not sure where it fits. Most Jaces end up being control deck Planeswalkers, but Jace really wants creatures because you need creatures to deal damage, to trigger the loot. The ultimate is super crazy. I just don't know what to make of that. Getting more copies of Jace with the ultimate, I mean, it's apparently pretty powerful to have a bunch of non-legendary copies of Jace. You're getting tons of tokens and doing tons of things. You reach the ultimate pretty quick. So I guess I gotta just withhold judgment on Jace. My concern is I don't see where it fits in Standard, being a blue Planeswalker that really wants to be in a creature-heavy deck. So that's my concern, but it's 3 mana, has really unique abilities, sort of protects itself. So I don't know what to say. I don't want to touch this one because maybe it ends up being like the most busted card in Standard. I could definitely see that happening. Maybe it ends up close to stone cold unplayable because it doesn't have a home, I could see that happening as well. So I don't know. We'll just leave it at that for now. Moving on to our next mythic, we have Tishana, Voice of Thunder, which is the new Merfolk legend. And this card is super sweet. It's very expensive. 7 mana is a ton, but its power toughness is equal to the number of cards in your hand, which sounds kind of so-so. It gives you no maximum hand size. The big deal is you draw a card for each creature you control when it enters the battlefield. So how good is Trishana, Voice of Thunder? It's really hard to say. 7 mana is naturally limiting. It reminds me a lot of Prime Speaker Zagana, kind of the opposite of Prime Speaker Zagana. Prime Speaker Zagana wanted you to go tall on one big creature, since you drew cards equal to the greatest power of a creature you controlled, while Trishana wants you to go wide with a bunch of little creatures because you draw cards equal to the number of creatures you control. I think it can be a potentially powerful effect, and it can be a potentially massive creature because once you draw 5, 6, 7, 10, 14 cards with Trishana, you just have the biggest thing on the battlefield. In Standard, there's a couple places that it could fit. They're not really known decks or popular decks at the moment, but maybe Trishana could make them happen. One thing I could see happening would be some sort of Bant token decks. Obviously, you have like Anointed Procession, Pride Sovereign, Regal Caracal. Go wide with a bunch of tokens, then you just play Trishana as your finisher. You're going to draw like 10 cards, 15 cards, have this huge creature on the battlefield. So it seems like there could be potential there. The other interesting possibility is some sort of combo deck with Inspiring Statuary. So Inspiring Statuary is a bit risky right now because of a braid, but in theory, if you can just like Servo Schematic, Cogworkers, Puzzle Knot, Inspiring Statuary for 2 real mana and tapping a bunch of Puzzle Knots and Servos, you play Trishana with like 5, 7, 8 creatures on the battlefield, refill your hand, draw a bunch more stuff, just keep going that way. So I really like the idea of that. Whether that is a competitive thing or an against the odds thing, I'm not very sure, but those are the 2 main things I see with Trishana. Otherwise, it just seems like a super fun commander. I imagine that Trishana will be pretty heavily played. Drawing cards is great, no maximum hand size, Reliquary Tower is already a staple in the format. So I think that we'll see a lot of decks, blue-green decks, ramping into Trishana, playing a bunch of creatures, going value town there. Also great with like Panharmonicon, awesome commander there, one of my favorite cards. So commander staple, Standard, I don't know where it fits, but it has potential to be powerful. Moving on, we have Gishath, Sun's Avatar, the new Dinosaur Lord, essentially. And this one is pretty hard to evaluate because it's super expensive. As far as Standard, you don't see too many 8 mana things seeing play. However, 8 mana, Trample, Haste, and Vigilance is a lot of value. That's a big threat coming down and just smashing your opponent's life total. And if you can have a bunch of dinosaurs in your library, you're going to be able to pull a bunch of them into your hand. So obviously works best if there's Dinosaur Tribal. We just don't know right now if Dinosaur Tribal can be a thing. We've seen a few other dinosaurs, but they're all really expensive. So we got to wait and see if we get more cheaper dinosaurs to really make it work. The other thing about Gishath is possibly it could be the top end of a ramp deck. Ulamog is leaving the format at rotation, but we still have Hour of Promise. We still have good ways to ramp. So maybe Gishath is just this top end attack, deal a bunch of damage, ramp into it on like turn 5 or something, and just crush your opponent with this huge trampling dinosaur. So I can see that happening. The other question with Gishath, as far as commander, is how many dinosaurs will we have? So Wizards has said that they will be errata-ing old cards to the dinosaur creature type. So I assume this means raptors like Deathmist Raptor. Fungasaur is pretty obviously a dinosaur. So we'll have to see how many cards get the errata. If they errata a bunch of them, I imagine that Gishath will be a super popular commander. It just seems like such a fun deck. You could play Dinosaur Tribal and Commander. So we gotta cross our fingers, hope that there's a lot of erratas to the dinosaur creature type to make Gishath good in Commander. If there's not a lot of erratas, it's gonna be really hard to play it because all we'll have is the handful of dinosaurs from Ixalan itself. So kind of wait and see in Commander. I expect that Wizards will make enough erratas that Gishath Commander can be a thing and will be a pretty fun, sweet deck to play, generating tons of card advantage, trampling over for commander damage. Seems like a lot of fun. Next up, we have Admiral Beckett Brass, which is our new pirate legend. So, Pirate Lord for 4 mana with a really unique ability. If you dealt damage to an opponent with at least 3 pirates, on your end step, you get to steal one of their permanents. So, I'm always a little skeptical of legendary lords. I really like lords that you can stack up on the battlefield, like Merfolk and vampires in Modern. But it's a really powerful effect to not only give the team +1/+1, but potentially steal your opponent's things. The good news about Admiral Beckett Barras is we already see the curve developing. Fathom Fleet Captain, Deadeye Tracker, Carry Zev Skyship Raider. It looks like we'll have enough pirates in the standard format that are all potentially pretty powerful, and this isn't even including all the cards yet to be revealed from Ixalan, that we can build an aggro pirate deck where you just play Admiral Beckett Barras at the top of your curve, hit your opponent for a bunch of damage, start stealing their stuff. The other concern is the second ability, while it sounds super sweet, you know, dealing damage with your pirates, stealing your opponent's stuff like a Shackles or Memnarch or Mind Control. The problem is it's a little bit win more in a lot of situations. If you think about a game of Magic, you just got in damage with 3 of your pirates. How often do you need to steal your opponent's thing? Like, what does the board state look like that you can attack and get in damage with 3 creatures and your opponent still have good stuff to steal? So it's a little bit weird in that sense, but it seems like a really fun ability. So even though I'm not sure how competitive the second ability is, I think it's really fun. Next on our list, we have Carnage Tyrant, which is just big and hard to deal with. This is kind of a control breaker in Standard. Can't be countered, has hexproof, so it's not going to die to removal, has trample, so it's not going to be jumped, 7 power for 6 mana. Is this card good? And I think the question is probably not that good. It depends on the meta. If we're in a control-heavy meta and everyone's trying to counter things, then yes, Carnage Tyrant is a great sideboard option to beat a blue-white control deck. It has 6 toughness, so it doesn't die to Hour of Devastation, which is a big deal in our current format. So I think it has a place in the format, but we've seen a lot of somewhat similar cards in the past. Sagu Mauler, Terra Stomper, Simic Sky Swallower, and for the most part, these cards have been somewhere between fringe and unplayed in their standard format. So I think it's a powerful effect in the right matchup, but I'm not really sold on it being a format-breaking card or even a staple card. It's a fine ramp into it type target. It's a great control breaker, but beyond that, I'm not really sure if it has a place in Standard. Next, we have Star of Extinction, 7 mana, 20 damage to everything, including planeswalkers, and you get to nuke a land. A great flavor card. The dinosaurs becoming extinct. I really like this card, but there's a big problem with the card in Standard, and that is we just got Hour of Devastation, which is 2 full mana cheaper, and most of the time, 5 damage is going to get rid of everything anyway. I don't think the difference between 5 and 20 damage is enough to make you pay 2 more mana, which is a huge amount more mana when you consider how land drops work in a typical deck. So as far as being standard playable, not really sure about Star of Extinction. I assume maybe Commander, maybe if the format for some reason has a lot of things that Hour of Devastation doesn't hit, you could play Star of Extinction in a ramp deck and it could be pretty good. I am excited about this card, though, in All Through Jank mode, because it's a I win the game combo. With Stuffy Dalboris Reckoner or Spitmare, you deal 20 damage to your own creature, and then redirect that damage at your opponent's face. So that's what I want to do with this card. Maybe some sort of, like, mono red devotion. Get your Stuffy Dowls and Boros Reckoners down, tap your Nykthos, cast a Star of Extinction, boom, your opponent just dies on the spot. So I like the card, even though I don't think it's going to be a staple in Standard. Next, we have Boneyard Parlay, which is like this weird mashup of Ever After and Fact or Fiction. It's kind of got the Fact or Fiction ability, where your opponent gets to separate the cards that you choose from the graveyards into 2 piles. You get to pick one of them to go on the battlefield, the rest go back to the graveyard. Most of the time, this is going to play, though, like a 7 mana Ever After. If you think about how the pile splitting works, your opponent's gonna not give you anything better than your 2 best cards, which is what you got with Ever After. And Ever After has been kind of a fringe card, so I think Boneyard Parlay, it's a fun card. I like the way it plays. The Factor Fiction mode is a really skill testing card, so it's cool to have Factor Fiction piles going on in Standard again. But for the most part, it's probably high end, maybe a 1 of to 2 of in a Reanimator deck, just like Ever After, because it's mostly overshadowed by Liliana's Seth's Majesty if you just need to reanimate a Razaketh, reanimate a Scarab God, or whatever you're trying to get back from your graveyard. Finally, we have Rowdy Crew. 4 mana, 3/3 with Trample. Has a really weird ability. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 3, discard 2 at random, then if those 2 cards share a card type, so they're both lands, they're both creatures, they're both instants, whatever, you get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on Rowdy Crew. It's pretty much a callback to Bolduvian Horde, which, if you were around for Magic 20 years ago, was amazingly hyped. Unfortunately, the hype was not merited, and it fell flat, and it wasn't really that good, but it was a super hype card at the time. 4 mana, 5/5, discarding a random card, so it reminds me a lot of Bolduvian Horde, although the history of Bolduvian Horde makes me a little bit nervous, because, like I said, it didn't really pan out as a staple. The thing with Rowdy Crew is the best case scenario, absolute best case scenario, you get a 4 mana 5/5, and maybe if you're a little bit lucky, you manage to like kind of improve your hand if you discard 2 lands and get some good cards. So I just don't think a 4 mana 5/5, even with Trample, and remember that's going to happen a pretty low percentage of the time. I don't know the exact numbers, it's hard to really calculate, but not every time. But a 4 mana 5/5 isn't that impressive anymore. We have Spellbreaker Behemoths, Pelucranos, Magmaros. These cards are 4 mana 5/5s all the time, so it's just not that insane of ability, which I think means the drawing and discarding part of Rowdy Crew really has to be good to make it work, and maybe there's a world that existed in like a Reanimator deck or something, but I don't really know what deck that would be in Standard. The other problem, when I first saw this card, I was like, okay, maybe this can be the top end of like Ramanamp Red. You curve out, you keep an extra land or 2 in your hand, you hopefully discard it and get more action with Rowdy Crew. The problem is it's pretty much directly competing with Chandra Torch of Defiance in that slot, and it's really hard for me to imagine that Rowdy Crew is better than Chandra Torch of Defiance as a top end in a mono red deck, and it's also like somewhat competing with Glorybringer, so I don't know. My hopes are not high for Rowdy Crew seeing play in Standard, although I don't want to write it off completely because the ability is pretty unique, and it's possible that the Faithless Looting-ass drawing and discarding, even though it's random, could be something that decks want and could maybe be the reason to play Rowdy Crew in a deck. To wrap things up today, I just want to really quickly go over the mechanics of Ixalan. So we did get the mechanics previews. Trishana Wayfinder shows off the Explore mechanic, which is actually pretty sweet. When it enters the battlefield, you get to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, it goes into your hand. Otherwise, you kind of scry one. You can either put the card back on top of your library or put it into your graveyard, and the creature gets a +1/+1 counter. So I actually really like this ability. You either get card advantage by getting the land in your hand, which is great, or you get to get rid of a card that you don't want on top of your deck, or you get to keep the card. So it's kind of like scrying, plus you get a benefit to your creature if it works out. And Rage, as we see on Sun-Crowned Hunters, is a little bit less exciting. I guess it can work in combat damage to an extent. If your opponent attacks into your Sun-Crowned Hunters, you can block and then redirect that damage. But basically, Enrage does something when the creature is dealt damage. Maybe there's ways to make it good, but it seems like it's very hard to control. Maybe like a pseudo unblockable type thing is how it'll play out. Your opponent's not going to want to chump it because then you get to deal damage with it. So I think it's fine, but it doesn't especially excite me outside of Limited. We also have the treasure artifact tokens, the ability to make these tokens and sack them for mana. They're basically like lotus petals, essentially, and I think it's a really cool mechanic. It's kind of like clue tokens, except you get mana instead of cards, but when it comes to Magic, 2 things you probably want more than anything else is mana and cards. While it's probably slightly worse than clue tokens overall, still works with like improvise, different artifact-based mechanics that we have left over from Kaladesh, so it seems like a pretty sweet mechanic. And then Raid is back. Raid does something if you attacked with a creature during the turn with Deadeye Tormentor. That means you are making your opponent discard a card. It's a fine, aggressive attacking mechanic. I bet this will be attached to a lot of the pirates. It seems like a good pirate mechanic. Raid wasn't super playable when it was last around, although there were exceptions. Wingmate Rock was very good as a raid card, so there were a few, but it basically pushes you towards being a more aggressive attacking style deck. We also got confirmation that Transform is back with a super unique card in Treasure Map. So Treasure Map, a 2-mana artifact, lets you tap and pay 1 to scry 1 and put a counter on it. Once you get 3 counters on it, you get 3 of the treasure tokens, plus it transforms into Treasure Cove, a land that adds mana and lets you sack your treasures to draw a card. Basically turns your treasures into clue tokens almost. So the big takeaway here is we have Transform back. We don't know exactly what that means, what's going to be transforming, but I'm assuming since there's at least one Transform card in the set, we probably will get more as well. Also makes the From the Vault Transform make a little bit more sense, being released in the middle of Ixalan. As far as the card itself, it's pretty spicy, and I think it could potentially be good, but it's very slow. You got to spend a lot of turns doing nothing to make it work, but it could be worth it in a control style deck where you don't mind the scry anyway. It gives you card advantage in the long run, and you want as many lands on the battlefield as possible, so everything it does is pretty good in a control deck. Finally, vehicles are back. The only one we've seen so far is the Sleek Schooner. Not an especially impressive card. A crew 1, 3 mana, 4/3. Don't expect this one to see any play, but vehicles are back. They're ships this time. Pretty sweet, and does definitely fit the flavor of pirates sailing around on Ixalan. Anyway, that's it for today. Those are the mythics and mechanics that we've previewed so far from Ixalan. As I mentioned, we got a ton of spoilers, so there'll be more coming out all week. Anyway, let me know what you think about these cards. What mythics are you most excited about? How good will the dinosaurs be? Do we have enough pirates to make a commander deck? What do you think about Transform and the mechanics of the set? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.